I get asked this a lot. A feedback loop is what? I like to put it more as a fill in the blank kind of a question. A feedback loop is, well, I gotta say, it is absolutely one of your most powerful tools in communications, in part because it's how you know whether or not somebody understood you. Now look, effective communications is defined this way. The receiver gets the message that the sender intended. I mean, have you ever had a conversation and at some point in the conversation somebody says, well, that's not what I meant. And the other person says, it's what you said. And we're not going to go into whether this is a professional conversation or a personal conversation or, oh God. I actually used to hear this in restaurants every once in a while. A feedback loop is the way to find out, if you're the sender, what was the message that the receiver got? And if you're the receiver, is this the message that you meant to send? Things like tone of voice can be massively important. So, of course, this is a leadership-driven project management initiative. We are going to talk about some specific things that you want to do about this. And by the way, let me just point out, a feedback loop doesn't have to be a big, formal, academic exercise. And it doesn't have to be something that people need to be afraid of. So we're going to be keying in on those particular aspects. Because I remember taking over a team from someone who used the term feedback loop to sugarcoat, you were so sucking at something, and I'm going to explain to you why, how, and what you're going to do to fix it. I'd never taken over a team where the term feedback loop could inspire so much angst. But it did. So I actually did a feedback loop. I said, okay, so, wow, that must have felt really uncomfortable, because if I'm understanding you correctly, the minute you heard the term feedback loop, you kind of had to brace yourself from some, getting some really major heated criticism. And they said, yes. And I said, but what we just did was a feedback loop, because I wanted to make sure I understood you. That's how I use the term. You could almost see the tension leaving people's necks and shoulders. And I remember feeling really sad. Because while it may take a little bit of courage to do a feedback loop, it is so worthwhile. So, a couple of things. Now remember, we go actionable. So, number one, please make sure everybody has the same context, the same understanding of what a feedback loop is. It's entirely possible that their experience has been limited to situations where the feedback loop was a behavioral thing. It was a criticism thing. Because the feedback part of the feedback loop is what most people hear the strongest. Actually, some of them don't even hear the word loop in there. But it is a very important thing. The fact that it's closing a circle. You send me a message. First part of the circle. I digest it. I just want to make sure, so I send you back the message that I got. hopefully that closes the loop. But it's entirely possible it might start another loop along the lines of the sender thinking to themselves, oh my God, did Kimi have enough coffee? Because I don't think she's actually all here right now. I can't believe she got that message. That is not at all what I meant. And they'll try again to send me the message. And I'll try again to figure out if I've heard it and received it accurately this time. Sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? But it's not. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that everybody is clear about what a feedback loop really means in your context, not my former colleague's context. The second thing is to encourage people to realize that this means that they're going to have to listen, possibly at a deeper level than they're used to. I know. There's a lot of talk about the different levels of listening and how you need to do better active listening and how you need to do active listening. I mean, some people actually never do it. I try to avoid those people. It's too much stress for me. But most people, particularly those who deal with things like, customer requirements, handing off work to the next person who's going to be in charge of taking that product to the next stage, we do some active listening. We might not do as much active listening as we should or could, but we are at least doing it. So please remember to let people know. If we're going to use a feedback loop as a productive part of our communications within the project team, then we also need to remember to switch on the active listening. The whole body listening is what my dear friend Flip used to call it. Because you listen not just to the words, but the tone of voice. You pay attention to the expression on somebody's face, to the level of tension that suddenly hits their body, and when it leaves. You pick up on the cues that have always been there, but that you need to pay just a little bit more attention to. Okay? So, set up a common context for the feedback loop. Set the expectation that this is going to require a lot more intentional listening. And give them room for the learning curve. That's tough, because in a project, and give them room for the learning curve. That's tough, because in a project environment, we always have these deadlines, and I don't use absolutes very often, but I just said always. Why? Because I haven't yet had a situation where somebody says, don't worry about it. Take all the time you need to get it right. I dream sometimes. That's another video lesson. Because the better they get at figuring out how to talk with each other, the more productive their communications are going to be. And they're never going to know if they didn't make the point they wanted to without a feedback loop. Well, let me rephrase that. They'll find out. I don't know how long it'll take. I don't know how much work is going to go into a product before they figure out that that was the message that they thought they were delivering, and that was the message that they actually delivered. See, you can't not communicate. Frustration gets across. Impatience gets across. And if you see on somebody's face that, oh my God, she's going to do a feedback loop again, take a deep breath. And remember, this isn't for me. It's for us. Because without the feedback loop, the project's deliverable can go off, herring off into a direction that doesn't serve the customer's objective. One of our key success parameters is a customer-focused deliverable. And not understanding each other when we're talking with each other and working with each other, well, that can kind of throw that off the rails, don't you think? So 1, make sure we have a common context for a feedback loop. 2, give everybody the room to understand that they're going to need to listen just a little more closely. Last but not least, and this is for you internally, but you might have to actually remind a few people in the team as well. Make room for the learning curve. It's a great investment. It truly is, because it shortens the amount of time it takes to reach a common understanding going forward. There's a Facebook group called the Leadership Driven Project Management Academy, where we also drop lessons that are free. But it doesn't matter. You're using Agile, you're using Lean, you're using Extreme Lean, you're using Six Sigma. I kind of don't care. Because regardless of which approach you use, where you get most of your tools, the one thing that's going to stay constant is that you're going to complete this project because of the people on your team. So you may not ever use a risk burn down chart. You may not ever use a risk matrix, but you'll always use your skills as a project leader. I'm Kimi Zimski. This video is being brought to you by the Leadership Driven Project Management Initiative. Thank you for joining us.